Good morning. Today is Wednesday, April 21st, 2021. In the verdict against Derek Chauvin for the murder of George Floyd, last year, I see three Torah points that add up to justice in this case and that remain lessons for all of us in similar cases. All too many similar cases. Number one, I have heard people say over the months and during the trial that George Floyd himself was not such a tzaddik, not such a righteous person. He'd been using drugs. Maybe he had committed a crime. Of course, he was not on trial. Of course, whatever it is that he did, the court found that what Chauvin did was unnecessary, against training, and criminal murder. At the same time, there's a tremendously important lesson from our parsha. The Torah says, "Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha," love your fellow as you love yourself. And our sages in the Talmud use this concept, this klal gadol, this fundamental, foundational statement about the entire Torah. They use this concept in the most startling ways, including the following. The Talmud says, during the time when criminal law was practiced, when the Beis HaMikdash was standing and the Jews were living in Israel, the majority of Jews were living in Israel, when a person would commit a crime, and let's say, God forbid, murder, and they would be sentenced to capital punishment. And remember, that's after full due process, and that's with two uncontested eyewitnesses, and with a warning given, a rare sentence of death. Says the Talmud, Baran lo misa yafa. You have to choose a method of execution that retains the dignity and the humanity of this person, notwithstanding how evil and wicked and horrible he is. At that moment, says the Gemara, we invoke the pasuk, Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. You still have to treat this fellow with the love that you would want to be treated as yourself. Barin lo misa yafa. That is the crime that we all witnessed. The callous indifference when Floyd was no longer a threat. Chauvin standing informally, it appeared, with his hands in his pockets, while his knee was on Floyd's neck, first preventing him from breathing, and then ignoring Floyd's pleas, "I can't breathe," and the pleas of onlookers, "You are killing him," and then continuing with that casual indifference after Floyd's breathing stopped. Chauvin is guilty not only of the crime of murder, but of not applying the concept of ve'ahavta under even these most extreme circumstances, as Jewish law requires, that he still maintain the dignity and the humanity of the person, even as he is taking police action. That's number one. Number two, I'm grateful to my colleague Shlomo Zuckier for pointing this out. It's interesting always to look at a Torah prohibition and in what context is the prohibition presented to us in the Torah. The Torah law source for the prohibition against assaulting one's fellow is in a surprising context. The case is as follows. It's talking about an officer of the court who is carrying out corporal punishment, again, after due process, after a court's decision and sentence. And the Torah says, Arboim yakenu. The guilty person is sentenced to 40 lashes. So that means that an employee of the court must impose those 40 lashes. The Torah says, Lo Yosef. Don't overdo it. Don't go beyond the number. Pen Yosef la koso al ela makaraba, because perhaps you will give an additional lash not rationalized by the sentence. That will be an act of assault. One lash over what is prescribed, that is an assault. One act of violence beyond what is absolutely necessary, that is an act of assault. So it's fascinating that the context where we learn for anyone not to commit an act of assault, not to hit another person, comes from the example of a police officer who is in the process of fulfilling a legitimate police goal. It's fascinating that the Torah recognizes the danger of giving the right of force to a certain group of people, employees of the court, police, and it affirms the necessity to do so, because we as a society cannot stay safe without police, and we as a society cannot stay safe without a court system, a judicial system. So we must give the right to force to certain individuals, but at the same time, we must recognize that that right comes with it the responsibility not to overdo it. And therefore, a policeman represents the archetypical case of hurting others. It is the example from which all other cases of assault are learned. Even in a situation where a police officer is imposing a just sentence, to go one step further is an act of assault. And I would point out, as some others have pointed out, it's not just the potential abuse of power, but it's the loss of the very humanity of the people who will be subject to it. Listen again to the words of the pasuk. Lo Yosef, pen Yosef la koso al ela makaraba. Perhaps this police officer will give one extra hit that is not legitimate. V'nikle achicha le'einecha, and the fellow will be degraded in your life, in your sight. The prohibition is not only the additional pain and violence, it is that you have taken away the humanity of this person who is subject to this punishment. Even there, we must watch out for their humanity and their dignity. Just as an effective and just society must give its police force, the latitude necessary to uphold safe living, that is absolutely necessary, that the police have that ability, society must also hold absolutely accountable in those cases of overreach. And I believe that most police observe this and want this oversight to maintain the nobility of their profession. We have to do a better job rejecting those who cross that line and those who are complicit by their silence. Number 3, also a lesson from our parsha. Al tamod el damriyacha, do not stand idly by when the blood of your brother is being spilled. Had it not been for Darnella Frazier and other bystanders who recorded this, this justice could never have been reached. Darnella was 17 years old at the time. Now she's 18. And she was afraid. She was threatened if she kept recording with her phone. But she did. Al Tamod, if you can intervene and save the victim, you must do so. Here the problem was the aggressors had guns and they had badges that made intervention to save Floyd's life impossible. Darnella testified that she cries at night, apologizing to George Floyd for not saving his life, for not doing more. But she did record it, and she showed it, and she testified about it in court. And she teaches all of us a lesson. Even if you can't stop a crime, you can help bring it to justice and perhaps stop the next crime. And that is likewise an extension of the mitzvah, Lo Samod Adam Reyacha. The lessons of this case for every one of us should be, in my opinion, police are important and they should be respected as long as they earn it by their actions, by their words, by their attitudes. There must be sufficient oversight so that they do not overstep their legitimate use of force. And I recognize that it can be extremely difficult to make that determination in a split second, and they are risking their lives when they do so. But that is the responsibility that comes with a gun, with weapons, and with a badge that authorizes you to use them. Police may never ignore the humanity of others, even criminals, once their safety and the safety of others is assured. And every one of us, in the face of injustice, must do whatever we can to either prevent it or hold those aggressors accountable. These are just some of the elements necessary for a society to be able to say about itself, tzedek, tzedek, tirdof. Justice, justice must you pursue. May it continue. My friends, I want to wish you a great day. I look forward to seeing all of you soon in person.